Welcome to Outside Views, where today we're exploring another essential topic in the ongoing Brexit saga. As an example, the impact of Brexit on trade between Portugal and the UK. While Brexit may seem like old news to some, its repercussions continue to unfold, affecting not only the UK, but also its European neighbours and trade partners. Portugal is one of the UK's long-standing trading partners, has seen significant shifts in trade patterns since Brexit. And this video takes an in-depth look at how Brexit has impacted Portuguese-British trade, highlighting key challenges and what the future might hold for economic relations between the two nations. First, let's start by understanding the scale of trade between Portugal and the UK prior to Brexit. For decades, Portugal and the UK enjoyed relatively smooth and predictable trade relations, benefiting from shared EU regulations and policies. The EU single market allowed goods, services, capital and labour to flow freely between member states, creating a robust environment for trade. As a member of the EU, the UK was one of Portugal's significant trade partners, especially in the service sector. In fact, by 2016, the UK was Portugal's largest partner in the services trade and an essential market for certain Portuguese goods. But despite the close trading relationship, the UK's share of Portugal's total trade was not dominant. It represented only a fraction of Portugal's total exports and imports. But fast forward to 2020, and Brexit has fundamentally changed the landscape of Portuguese-British trade. The UK's departure from the EU on January 31st in 2020 severed many of the established agreements that had governed this trade. And since then, both countries have had to navigate a new reality marked by border checks, regulatory differences, and fluctuating trade dynamics. The introduction of customs checks, for instance, has created bottlenecks in the movement of goods between Portugal and the UK. And this has led to delays, increased costs and logistical challenges, making it harder for Portuguese businesses to maintain steady exports to the UK. And now let's discuss the impact on goods trade specifically. Since Brexit, the volume of goods traded between Portugal and the UK has declined significantly. From Portugal's perspective, the most heavily impacted goods have been those requiring compliance with specific regulatory standards, like food and agricultural products. Prior to Brexit, these goods moved freely under EU rules, but now they must comply with the UK's new regulations, adding extra layers of bureaucracy and cost. And data shows that Portuguese goods exports to the UK have declined, and many firms that used to trade with the UK have either reduced or stopped their exports altogether. One study estimated that the decline in Portuguese-British trade has resulted in an output loss of up to 0.1% for Portugal's economy. And while this might sound small in terms of GDP, it still represents a substantial economic impact for specific sectors and for specific businesses. The story is somewhat different when it comes to services trade. Interestingly, Portuguese services exports to the UK have not been as heavily impacted as goods exports. In fact, services trade with the UK has shown resilience, and the UK remains Portugal's most significant partner in this area. This is partly because services, especially those related to finance, technology and tourism, are less affected by customs barriers compared to physical goods. Nevertheless, some Portuguese service providers have faced challenges due to changing regulatory requirements, particularly around financial services and professional qualifications, and there are still transitional periods in some places. Many of these sectors now face increased scrutiny, and firms must navigate the complexities of complying with both UK and EU regulations, which adds time and expense to their operations. So why have goods exports suffered more than services? One reason is that goods require physical transportation across borders, which now involves customs checks, import taxes, and compliance with separate health and safety standards. And these additional steps increase delivery times and make Portuguese exports to the UK less competitive, as British importers might seek alternative suppliers to avoid delays. In contrast, services like consulting, IT, and finance can often be delivered digitally, making them less vulnerable to physical border disruptions. And let's talk about the specific impact on Portuguese firms. Research suggests that Portuguese companies that continue to export to the UK after Brexit have grown at a slower rate than those that stopped exporting there. And this slower growth can be attributed to the increased costs and challenges associated with maintaining a trade relationship with the UK. For some companies, the added expenses of tariffs, regulatory compliance, and logistics are simply unsustainable, prompting them to exit the UK market altogether. And meanwhile, companies that shifted their focus away from the UK have found more stability in intra-EU trade, where the single market rule, of course, still apply. In certain industries like agriculture and food production, the impact of Brexit has been particularly pronounced. Portuguese producers of products like wine, olive oil, and fresh fruits used to have a reliable market in the UK. However, post-Brexit border checks and custom fees have disrupted this trade, leading some Portuguese exporters to reduce their shipments to the UK or even explore alternative markets within the EU. The extra administrative burden has made it challenging for small and medium-sized enterprises, the so-called SMEs, to continue exporting to the UK, as they often lack the resources to handle complex customs requirements. And there's another factor to consider as well, the impact on investment. The uncertainty created by Brexit has led some Portuguese companies to reconsider their investment plans in the UK. Businesses are now more cautious, and many have chosen to focus their investments within the EU instead, where they feel more secure under the single market. For Portuguese firms, the UK used to be an attractive destination for investment, but Brexit has introduced a level of risk that has shifted the focus back to the EU. The decline in Portuguese-British trade isn't just a one-sided story. The UK has also seen a reduction in its exports to Portugal, particularly in the goods sector. Before Brexit, British products like machinery, vehicles, and pharmaceuticals had quite a strong presence in Portugal. But with the, for them, new trade barriers, British exporters face similar challenges in accessing the Portuguese market, resulting in reduced exports and higher prices for some goods. For example, British wine, which was popular in Portugal, has seen a decline in sales due to added costs from customs duties and the compliance requirements. In the long term, these trade disruptions could lead to a reconfiguration of Portugal's trade relationships. As Portuguese companies adapt to the new post-Brexit reality, they may continue to shift their focus toward the EU or other global markets. And already there are signs that some Portuguese businesses are strengthening trade ties with other European countries, while the UK's role in Portuguese trade diminishes. While the UK may remain an essential partner in services, its influence over Portuguese goods trade is likely to decrease unless substantial adjustments are made to ease trade barriers. So, what could be done to mitigate the impact of Brexit on Portuguese-British trade? One approach would be for the UK and the EU to establish a more comprehensive trade agreement that simplifies cross-border procedures and reduces tariffs. But we have the TCA, and they will not go beyond that because they think there could be greater cooperation in regulatory alignment. That's possible, especially in areas like food safety and environmental standards, to reduce some burden on business trading between the two regions, but there will not be a real new agreement here. From Portugal's perspective, it may also be beneficial to strengthen its economic policies to support businesses adapting still to the post-Brexit landscape. And this could include financial assistance for companies dealing with the increased trade costs, as well as incentives to explore new markets within the EU and beyond. And by providing support to affected industries, Portugal can help its businesses even more to remain competitive and resilient, even as they navigate the challenges of Brexit. But they got a lot of assistance from the EU already. I made videos of that in the past. But Brexit has left a lasting mark on Portuguese-British trade, and the changes brought by Brexit have disrupted established trade patterns, with good exports suffering the most. And while services trade has proven more resilient, Portuguese firms have faced new challenges and uncertainties in their trade relationship with the UK. As Portugal continues to adapt to this new reality, it may look increasingly to the rest of the EU, and there they might find what they're looking for, and that's growth and stability. So thank you for watching Outside Views, and if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.